Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is the Ukraine War Update news segment for the 7th of March 2023. I feel rough as a badger's ass today. Thank you, children, for bringing that back from school. So I don't know whether I'll be able to give the normal output of 3 videos today, although I always say that and still generally do. Hey ho. Let's go to our opening gambit. Lots of stuff to talk about, but we always go to here. The Ukrainian released figures for Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats, inaccurate propaganda. Russia don't produce the same kind of figures, although I am finding these to be fairly accurate, increasingly accurate, and I'll talk about that in a second. And a bad day yesterday for the Russians. In fact, this is the second worst day for troop losses and a staggering day for artillery systems losses. So I don't know whether that represents this for me is not about the exact numbers, but it's about what it represents. And do we have a situation where the Ukrainians are targeting artillery systems? Anyway, we'll get there in a second. So 1,060 liquidated personnel. As I say, that's the second highest since this war's begun. That is a huge number of troops lost to the Russians. 9 tanks, 11 APCs, so that's fairly significant. And then it really jumps to a huge number here, 23 artillery systems lost. Does this represent a definite targeting, an explicit targeting of artillery systems, rather than it just being a random day where it just so happens that 23 artillery systems have been lost? I don't know. My intuition would be that that looks to be somewhat targeted. 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems, 1 aircraft, that's a fixed-wing aircraft. There was a Ka-52 attack helicopter, alligator attack helicopter that was found behind Vulnervaca. I don't know if that had already been counted and it was a wreckage, it was just filmed, but that was seen yesterday. I've got some footage of that. 9 drones, 16 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 2 pieces of special equipment. So really pretty bad day for the Russians on the front lines. Of course, one must also consider that just because it's a bad day for the Russians doesn't mean it's not a bad day for the Ukrainians. In fact, it's highly likely that if the Russians lose a lot of forces, there's a strong possibility Ukrainians might have done as well if these are troops that have been lost on the front line as opposed to being hit with things like HIMARS. So often high troop losses are HIMARS losses. Now, I'm then going to go back to seeing this from the Ukrainian side. There were some big hits on certain troop accumulations. We know that Melitopol, Mariupol, and Vulnervaca were hit with large numbers of troops. There are reports of several hundreds of troops killed in, I think, Melitopol. So this is probably what is underwriting the large number of liquidated personnel. Here's the wreckage of that Ka-52 downed outside of Vuhledar. Whether when that was shot down, I don't know, and whether that's already been counted on those on that list, I'm not sure. Oh, I will. Well, okay, I'll get there in a second. So another interesting stat is Oryx's counting up of visually confirmed. So these are definitely lost, and they do a good job to try to make sure they're not double or triple counted. They counted 66. In total, 66 pieces of equipment lost by the Russians yesterday, including 23 tanks. So 23 tanks were on a list of what was destroyed. That doesn't mean these were destroyed yesterday. These have been counted up. In fact, they normally do it in 2-day lots. However, there was a high number of Ukrainian piece of equipment as well, 28. But it's interesting seeing that, like, the different types of equipment. So here you've got quite a number of trucks and whatnot. You've also got an aircraft, the Su-27. So that's obviously been shot down recently. But yeah, 28 to still over double. The Russians have lost over double the amount of equipment, and 23 tanks is a big old number. Let's talk aircraft for a short while. Now, Oryx, I think, previously has said that of all the figures on this list, on this daily list, they say the aircraft are the ones that are most inflated. And I get a sense that that was from earlier on in the war. I think more recently, you have seen an accurate portrayal of the number of aircraft lost. Quite often, the footage comes out a day, 2 days, 3, 4 days after we see these figures, and they do seem to correlate fairly well. However, we've got a much more conservative estimate here from the who is he? The U.S. Air Force commander in Europe. I think Hecker is his name. Yeah, General Hecker. He has said that Ukraine has lost roughly 60 aircraft so far since Russia's renewed invasion of the country in February 22, while the Russians have lost more than 70. So more than 70 is a very different number to 592. Okay, so you can see that there's a huge difference here, and this is what has led some people to say this is largely overinflated. However, just from recent numbers, I would suggest that 70 is really conservative. Although I wouldn't go along with the Ukrainian figures in their totals, I would say I'm positive it's more than 70 going back to the beginning of the war. But anyway, that is what this American general is saying, and also involved with NATO. So you make of this what you will. Talking of tank losses, 5 tanks are lost just in is one piece of footage. Although I struggle to actually make out the 5. I think it's just cut from a larger thing, but they're all on fire. But anyway, no report seems to indicate that represents 5 tanks. There is certainly at least 3 exploding things. There's a tank on its back there. But anyway, yeah. So I don't know where that is, but why I put that there is to say, look, when these numbers come out, when you have 9 tanks, well, is this a load of rubbish? Is this true? What evidence do we have? Well, here's some new footage that come out of 5 tanks in one place destroyed. So it starts making these claims, these figures look more realistic. Okay, I'm going to talk about Bakhmut figures. Again, this is to do with lost figures. So Phillips O'Brien said the reporting this, lots of people in the comments thread yesterday were talking about this. There have been different numbers, and pro-Russians are saying, well, and they laugh in the face of 1 to 5, 1 to 7 ratio. And where's the evidence for this? And then other people are saying, well, this is what's been reported, and lots of contrasting views in the information space. Phillips O'Brien here, so historian up at military historian up at St Andrews University, says the reporting of what is happening around Bakhmut is all over the place, but overall it's impressionistic. Different soldiers and officers in different parts of the line experience very different things. Because some of them are quoted doesn't mean the battle is definitely going one way or the other. This is in direct response to the Kyiv Independent article, I'm sure, as well. As well as other sort of voices coming out. So the Kyiv Independent article I shared with you yesterday was pretty damning of what's going on the Ukrainian front, saying actually they're not getting enough training, equipment and support, etc. But as Phillips O'Brien says, this is a bunch of guys from one particular unit being asked about, or a couple of different sort of units. One was drones, being asked about their experiences. It doesn't necessarily mean it's representative of what's going on in Bakhmut as a whole. But is that just trying to seek out a silver lining to the cloud? We don't actually have any reliable data on Ukrainian losses, just lots of impressionistic descriptions. Here is a first report claiming an actual figure for relative losses around Bakhmut from a Western source with intelligence access. 5 to 1 in Ukraine's favor, I think that's supposed to say. If so, that explains why Ukraine wants to keep fighting there. They're wasting Russian fighting power. And that is Kyiv Independent drawing from CNN, which is a self-drawing from a NATO intelligence expert, I believe. He goes on to talk about, historically speaking, Bunker Hill, which is a famous Pyrrhic victory, was a 3 to 1 loss ratio. British to Continental. The British, I think, won that battle, but they couldn't go on any further. It's very, very strong parallels to Bakhmut, but the Russians could win Bakhmut, take it at a 5 to 1 loss ratio, but then they've expended their capacity. So Nathaniel Green would probably judge Bakhmut as a campaign worth fighting. Just read the CNN story. It says, so this is actually the core source of these claims. It says 2 things in particular worth noting. 1, the Russians are losing at least 5 soldiers around Bakhmut for every 1 Ukrainian. That means that the Ukrainian claim of 7 to 1 made a few days ago might actually be accurate. And the second is that the estimate is an informed estimate based on intelligence. In other words, it has some evidence behind it. It's not just plucked out of the air. I think some of the dramatic stories about Ukrainian losses around Bakhmut of the last few days might need to be toned down. So he's really fighting the corner for Ukraine inflicting huge losses on Russia. There does seem to be huge losses. Prigozhin seems to be somewhat worried not only about ammunition still, but about losing Bakhmut and the ramifications that would have for the whole campaign. So there's lots of information flying around, and trying to pick out the relevant bits that are most reliable is difficult. Okay, I will come back to Bakhmut. Says the mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, the exiled mayor. Hundreds of Russian soldiers may have been killed in Ukrainian strike on occupied Melitopol. Said 2 powerful explosions were heard in Melitopol, Zaporizhzhia Oblast, possibly killing hundreds of Russian soldiers. And then we've got Vulnervaca. Now, that was hit a couple of times. I reported this yesterday, but I didn't give you the details on it. So what it was, as far as I understand, is they were holding some commemoration for, I think, a year ago since someone died or something like that. And they had an accumulation of quite a lot of high-ranking people, I think, and soldiers and whatnot. And I think in a bar there, and they hit that, they took it out. So arrival of 2 HIMARS Gimlers missiles in Vulnervaca. Today is 1 hour since the death of Vladimir Vulnervaca. Commemorative events took place in the city. Most likely they were aimed precisely at them. Not 100% sure about the translation of some of those words. So that was a big strike in Vulnervaca, involving possibly some quite high value targets. And there's likely been a hit last night in Yenikiev. That was where we saw recently a Russian plane shot down, possibly by friendly fire, though some people say it wasn't friendly fire. And that is 50 kilometers northeast of Donetsk. So I think where Avdiivka is, that's Donetsk city, well behind front lines. So some further strikes there. And then other further strikes on Sevastopol, which is 227 kilometers from Ukraine's front line at Belbek military air base. What is firing at that, we don't know. It could well be drones. I think there's a lot of drone activity on Crimea at the moment. And then a Russia on fire, large shopping complex in Bryansk, which is a bordering oblast to Ukraine, went up in flames this evening. Bryansk is in the news a lot recently. The fire is in a village of Novye Darkovichi. There's hotel, shops, and car repair service, and a tire shop in a complex. So that's all gone up in flames. That's quite a significant fire. We just see a lot of these. And again, could be completely innocent, could be an insurance job which is connected to the war, and it could well be partisan activity. Who knows? But it's certainly statistically significant numbers of fires. Okay, we're going to move on to military aid now. Russia has refrained from buying ballistic missiles from Iran due to fears that Ukraine will receive long-range missiles, the Financial Times writes. So this is the idea that Russia might be aware that escalating, like this is a counter-escalation narrative here, which is that previously you've heard Russia say, well, if you do that, we're going to have to, this is going to escalate the war, nuclear, blah, 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 blah. Here we've got, well, if we buy these long-range missiles off Iran, so Iran have got these cruise missiles and long-range ballistic missiles and whatnot, that they're potentially going to sell to Russia. If Russia buys them, then that will just open a door to things like ATACMS. And actually, buying a few of these missiles off Iran versus the rest of, all of Ukraine's allies getting together and providing long-range missiles, that is a calculation that Russia probably, don't like the conclusion of. So it's interesting that they might be holding back themselves. Now, this was mentioned by someone in the thread, actually, and I was wondering this myself. Was this one of the clever Ukrainian ploys, which is the UK have given us, they've doubled the number of Challenger 2 tanks they're going to give us without the UK actually having said that. And then the UK goes, oh, have we? Oh, my goodness, we better find 14 more Challenger tanks. This is that sort of cunning ploy. As you might say to your child, "Oh, thank you for doing the washing up. I haven't done the washing up." Yeah, yeah, no, thanks for doing that. Oh, I better do the washing up. It's that kind of thing. Slightly more seriously. Uh, Here's the idea that the UK haven't actually supposedly agreed to give a further 14 Challenger 2 tanks. I really hope they do. This isn't, it's trying to work out what is actually going on here. This is from Shepherd Media. However, Shepherd understands that there are currently no plans to increase the UK's main battle tank contribution, and substantive talks to increasing to 28 Challenger 2s have not taken place. That's a huge shame, but we'll keep an eye on that, see how that develops. We've got the decoys. I showed you one of these decoys being inflated recently, and I think they had a price tag of $25,000. I guess if they're going to save something that's worth $1 million or so, then it's worthwhile spending that money. Decoys by Inflatech are extremely easy and quick to set up and transport, while also using a series of reflectors and false thermal signals in an attempt to fool hostile artillery or aircraft into targeting these inflatables instead of actual military aircraft. And that could be what's actually costing a little bit more. You wouldn't think of like a glorified bouncy castle is going to cost $25,000, but it's putting on the bells and whistles. So actually, from the air, these things look pretty good. If you are a fast-moving Lancet drone, you might easily be fooled by these. And I think there are tank versions. There are other ones. So I've seen a number of these. On show. Yeah, in fact, there you go. There's a tank, HIMARS. Lots of different ones. Inflatable decoys of HIMARS and some kind of main battle tank, possibly an M1A1 Abrams, produced by the Czech company Inflatech, have been photographed. However, their CEO has refused to say the decoys are going to Ukraine, but the sales are indeed up 30% since last year. I don't know who else would want these decoys at the moment, but the CEO further stated that he started out and would prefer to be making inflatable toys for children. Quote, but first we have to secure a safe world for them. Then we'll hopefully return to civilian projects. Right. JDAM. Okay. What are JDAM? Well, these aren't just JDAMs. These are potentially JDAM ERs. So winged JDAM smart bombs are now operational in Ukraine, says the Wall Zone. The US Air Force's top officer in Europe says JDAM ERs are now in Ukrainian hands, putting whole new Russian target sets at risk. Interesting. So let's have a quick look into this. So the Ukrainian Air Force can now employ Joint Direct Attack Munition Extended Range Precision Guided Bombs, or JDAM ERs, against Russian forces, says the US Air Force's top officer in Europe. And I guess this is Hecker again. Yeah, General Hecker. These are the different ranges of JDAMs. They range in the bombs that are used, the initial dumb bombs that are adapted with wing kits and some GPS guidance as well, so they can glide and hit targets that are much further away. A typical so they can be 500-pound glass. These ones up to 2,000 pounds. So it's a big difference in those two warheads. A typical JDAM can, depending on the altitude at which it is released, hit targets up to 15 miles away. The JDAM ER's addition of the wing kit extends the weapon's range to some 45 miles. So we have a 3 times larger range with the ER. Now, 15 miles is great, but you have to get your plane up quite high, and the higher you get your plane, the more it is a target to surface-to-air missile systems. So these things can be dangerous, but if you can have an extra cushion of distance due to the ER increased range, then that allows you a greater degree of safety. The exact configuration of the JDAM ERs that Ukraine has received so far is unclear. General Hecker also referred to them as the designation GBU-62. However, the only previously known variant of the GBU-62 appears to be the GBU-62V1B, also known as a Quick Strike ER, which combines the JDAM ER kit with a 2,000-pound class Mark 64 Quick Strike naval mine. You can read much more about that here, and it gives a link. Now, why I've included that part is interesting is that he may have misspoke about the type of one it is, or if it is this naval mine that's been adapted, then that's a 2,000-pound bomb, which is a very powerful piece of munition. So that would be good news for the Ukrainians if they're getting the most powerful version. Hacker also stressed the total number of JDAM ERs that Ukraine currently has is limited. They have enough to do a couple of strikes, he said. Now, this is I almost shared this with you yesterday. I just wasn't sure. There were lots of people saying this was a JDAM, but it seems it really might be. Here is some footage. Let's actually just play that here.
Ooh.
Right, that you can see why people are saying that as JDAM. That was on a far greater explosion from that munition that we've seen from anything like a HIMARS. So that is there's good good evidence to, well, you know, it seems pretty good rationale that is JDAM. That is also a claim of a JDAM. So even a small number of JDAM ERs will present new challenges for Russian forces. As the war zone has noted in the past, a standard JDAM provides a precision-guided fire-and-forget weapon that an aircraft can launch at fixed targets in any weather and then immediately turn away to put distance between it and enemy defenses. The INS, this is the inertial system portion of the guidance package, means that the bomb should retain a significant degree of accuracy even if the GPS signal is jammed or otherwise lost. I talked about this yesterday, how Lancets have an inertial system that, as they're going into their target, I think it flips the inertial system that can't be jammed, with lots of gyroscopes and magnetometers and so on. The JDAM ER's wing kit then expands the reach of the weapon and helps further improve survivability. But this is really good news for the Ukrainians, that JDAM is definitely going to be a really useful piece of kit for them to have. Now, this shows you that's a 500-pound bomb. So that's the smallest of the JDAM. That's a 2,000-pound bomb. So you can see they have considerable damage potential, these JDAMs. This is a big, this is significant shift for Ukrainian capabilities. Right, let's look at a few geopolitical nuggets. Only a couple here. First is that Ukraine has fulfilled all 7 recommendations of the EU, which were determined when it received a candidate status. This demonstrates our determination to move to the start of accession negotiations ready this year, says Prime Minister Shmyhal. Ukraine are really wanting to join the EU. Obviously, this goes back to, you know, the Euromaidan protests and Ukraine pulling out of those despite all the agreements and whatnot. I mean, this is kind of the genesis of this war, to arguably. Now, Ukraine really have desired to rush through their candidacy, and they really want that accession to happen as soon as possible. The EU, on the other hand, is saying, yeah, we really want that to happen as well, but actually it's a really long process and takes an awful lot of ticking boxes and making sure your country is ready. And there are other countries that have been working a lot longer than you have that are further down the line. But on the other hand, EU have also said, but we really want to congratulate you, reward you for really desiring to join the EU and changing things and doing this. So I think there's going to be some kind of compromise, but that compromise might annoy other nations who have been waiting longer than Ukraine. Wall Street Journal: Russia's budget deficit widens after Western sanctions nearly halve oil and gas revenues. Russia's budget deficit rose to $34 billion for the first 2 months of the year, according to the country's Ministry of Finance data, up from $25 billion in January. Those are some significant deficits happening. Right, bits and bobs. Just quickly, this kind of goes back to the Kiev Independent article on how some of the troops in Bakhmut are struggling and they don't feel they've got enough training and using old weapons and so on and so forth. and I'll explain that in a second with regard to this Economist article. But there's been a whole slew of translated videos coming out of Russians complaining. We are not people, not meat. We are people, not meat. Mobilized from the Kaliningrad, Murmansk, and Arkhangelsk regions complained about the intimidation of the command. They also stated they use weapons from the 1940s, including mortars and guns. They're being threatened with punitive measures. There are a lot of these videos. There's a whole gamut of unhappy Russian soldiers at the moment. Things are not good on the front line. This has gone viral yesterday, and not in a good way. This haunts me. This video, I've watched it, and it's horrific. I mean, war is like that. People are being shot like this. At least, you know, on the battlefront, in battle, being shot like this all day, every day, in the Ukraine war. But when you've got someone who is effectively a prisoner of war, just standing there, no weapons, being ordered to do something, and just says "Glory to Ukraine," and then gets mercilessly shot, that is a war crime. It is horrific. As I say, it haunts me. Lots of people have made lots of comments on this. I'm not sure there's anything I can add other than it's going to be yet another war crime to add to the vast list of war crimes that Russia has committed. And this guy will kind of go down as an icon now, just the way he did it, the way he stood there, and just it was his two fingers up to Russia, to the people in front of him, saying, "No, I'm not going to do what you say. Glory to Ukraine." And then them just shooting him, horrific, but the strength of character to do that. So yeah, another war crime. So going back to Bakhmut, National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine Secretary Danilov revealed some details of today's headquarters of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief meeting, at which it was decided that the armed forces of Ukraine would not leave Bakhmut. Today, there is no talk of Bakhmut's entourage. We understand that the situation is not simple, and therefore collective decisions are being made on what to do in one direction or another, how to strengthen this direction. And such issues are constantly being discussed at headquarters. Today, at least an hour and a half, there was a discussion of all the nuances, he said. But you also had Zelensky and Zelensky saying, yeah, we're not giving up on Bakhmut, even though they have withdrawn from the eastern side to the west of the river. It appears that they are not doing a complete runner. Now, whether this is deception for an operation withdrawal, I don't know. Their reporting from Ukraine is stating that, you know, there are sort of these counterattacks going on north and south, and it was sort of trapping in Russian forces, or that they've reduced the lines so that there's actually a denser force concentration of Ukrainians, that they've managed to get the Russians into a smaller area in the north to then hit them with a whole load of artillery, and even, I think, helicopter barrages of rockets as well. So the positives could be spin is that, you know, this is a good position for the Ukrainians to do some kind of, I don't know, counterattacking, or just fix the Russians in, so on and so forth. I shared with you the Kyiv Independent article saying, "Oh, it's looking pretty dodgy. These troops are being sent in without much training, without much equipment." But I was saying, to me, what this looks like, and I'm really happy that, you know, hashtag ATP007, The Economist here is basically said exactly this. So rather than sending in your decent troops that you're training up all around the world and back behind the lines, they've rushed in some stopgap defenders so that they can still commit to a proper counteroffensive or two going forward. So this Economist article, Ukraine is building up its forces for an offensive. And it talks about the flow of arms has accordingly turned from a trickle to a flood. Of all the military aid pledged by the Pentagon since the war began, 40%, over $8 billion, has come in the last 3 months since December the 9th. See the chart. You can see that massive uptick there. One European defense official says the infusion of arms agreed in Germany in January alone amounts to 2/3 of the total sent to Ukraine in all of 2022. Most of the donations are not as sexy as tanks, but are still crucial. The latest American package includes armored bridge lane vehicles, for instance, which would be vital for any offensive in the south or east. Ukraine's army is being transformed as a result. The bulk of its hardware is still of Soviet origin, but whereas the ratio of Ukrainian to Western kit stood at 5-1 at the end of last year, that is expected to fall to 5-2 as the aid flows in. In other words, almost a third of Ukraine's army will soon have NATO standard equipment. General Zaluzhny hopes that he will eventually have the 3 new army corps at his disposal, each with 6 brigades and each comprising more than 20,000 men, each comprising. So that would be 60,000 men to well trained, you would assume, or at least a fairly decent amount of training compared to what the Russians are getting, being thrown into these offensives. Here's a bit that chimed. Instead of throwing sizable reserves into Bakhmut to save the city, which is of far greater symbolic than military value, he has sent troops abroad to train on the new equipment. Since January, America's 7th Army Training Command has been running a 5-week course for Ukrainian units in its Grafenwehr training area in eastern Bavaria. During its offensive last year, Ukraine's army largely attacked in company-size formations. The training in Grafenwehr is intended to bring these together into bigger battalions and brigades capable of waging combined arms warfare in which infantry, armor, artillery, and other arms combat work together rather than just sequentially, as is mostly the case now. And it goes on. That's really significant. So they are training on big combined arms initiatives in Germany and other places like the UK. Tens of thousands of people. And the people who are being sent to Bakhmut are not those people, which is, it's sad for those people being sent to Bakhmut. They are, in some sense, sacrificial. They're sending in less well trained, less equipped soldiers to just bide the time for the Ukrainians to get their counteroffensive up and running, to get those troops trained and the equipment into Ukraine. So Bakhmut appears to be just buying the Ukrainians time whilst they're tricking Russian soldiers at a rate that is really problematic for the Russians going forward. So that's a double intention there, and that's what I think is going on, and that's supported, it seems, by this kind of rationale. Anyway, there you go. That's enough of me talking. There's a long one today. Sorry, too much chat. Anyway, please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching. It'll be shorter tomorrow, I promise, or something. Speak to you later.